Father. We're here again every Friday talking about the 3 pillars of Lent. And today I want to kind of focus a bit on prayer in a sense of how do we recognize God's will for us in our life, and how do we surrender our will so that we can, line up to what God envisions our life to be.
That is a work of a lifetime. That is the most important thing you and I are called to do. So whatever I say here in this next couple minutes is never meant to be the definitive word. Somehow if you go step by step with all this, everything's going to work out just fine. Because our ego gets in the way of all this. We have a way, I have a way of trying to move forward that seeks my will in the name of God, as opposed to finding God's will. And it's a battle. It's a battle all of our life long. We get better at it, I think, as our life unfolds. We become more humble to be able to do all that. But let me give you a couple directives maybe, or a couple guidelines that might help us in this process. Is that okay?
Yes. Okay. Start with whatever you're going to start with.
Okay. So first of all, this is basic, fundamental. A relationship with Jesus. That is fundamental. We're not going to hear God speak to us until we're in relationship with Him. And our relationship with the Father is always through Jesus. So Jesus is the way to the Father, and this intimate personal relationship with Jesus takes us to God our Father and His love for us. And so I think that's critical, that we actually, as one person puts it, we walk with God. And that's what I mean by that we have this relationship with God that is deeply personal. And secondly, I would say right now, whatever you know to be God's will for your life right now, make sure you do that. Like for myself, I don't think God's calling me to be a missionary in Guatemala tomorrow. So God's will for me is to do what I can here at Our Mother of Sorrows and St. Michael's. So the obvious stuff of God's will, let's do that. Mm-hmm. And the third thing that I would say about all this is we have to learn to listen with our heart. This is the prayer part. That somehow or other, prayer is really a matter of not the head, even though we begin there with our prayer. And oftentimes you cannot love who you do not know. So we have to have things in our head. We have to have this relationship with God to get to know God, but eventually that has to move to our heart. And so our prayer ultimately becomes a matter of our heart as opposed to our head. Then I would say, look at your circumstances in your life. As I was saying before about myself, Mother Teresa would say things like, people would say to Mother Teresa, "Oh, I'm going to come to be with you in Calcutta, and I'm going to find God's will there." She would say, find your own Calcutta. Find your own place where you're supposed to do things. What's your circumstance? You, Anne, are married. I'm a diocesan priest for the Diocese of Altoona Johnstown. Probably God's going to take us away from all those things in some strange way. So what are our circumstances now? Live our circumstances now in all of that. Then I would say, pay attention to how you are wired. What is your temperament? What are your gifts? Like, if God's not going to ask me to be the pianist at Mass. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. God's not going to ask me to take Kevin's job as far as technology. That's not how I'm wired. But they are wired that way, and Michael's wired that way, and Dan's wired that way, and so that's their gifts. And so God would want us to use those. And I would also go on to say that temperament-wise, introvert, extrovert, God's not going to call someone who is a great introvert, a quiet person, who is very intuitive in thinking through things, and make them the life of the party. That's not how He's going to operate. So pay attention to how you're wired. And finally, seek godly input. And I think mentors would be good. Small groups, I think, are a way for us to be able to find out, what is God trying to say to me? Talk to my friends about different things. And make sure they don't start talking about themselves, talk about you and the situations you're in. And so I find good godly input from other people. And those are some directives that I would say that are helpful in us learning what it means to surrender ourselves to God's will. But it is the work of a lifetime. There's a great book by De Caussade called Abandonment to Divine Providence that somehow I abandon my life to God's will at every single moment of my life. And what he is talking about is what we're talking about here. And it is indeed a work of a lifetime. To be fully abandoned to God, I think, is to find our every happiness in life. Does that help in any way with all that?
I think it helps a lot. And the other thing I'm thinking about is the Ignatian, what is that practice?
The exercise.
The exercise, because when you take the time to examine what God has done in your day, it helps to.
Oh, that's the consciousness exam.
Yes.
That would be a very good way. I would absolutely, maybe that could be a complete topic.
Sure.
The next time we talk about prayer.
Right.
The consciousness exam, people can look that up. That is a very good way to discern God's will in your daily life. Yes,
right.
I would agree.
Right. So, okay, that's a topic for another day. So, okay, thanks, Father, for
You're
spending
welcome.
a few minutes with us today.
Yes.